Marcel Vaughan understood something was wrong long before anyone said a word. It wasn't the room. It wasn't the silence. It wasn't even the way people avoided his eyes. It was the certainty settling in his chest, heavy, final, that whatever protection he thought he had was gone. Not threatened, not damaged, gone. He stood still, keys forgotten in his hand, aware that time had quietly moved past the point where explanations mattered. This wasn't the kind of moment that arrived with shouting or accusations. There were no raised voices, no slammed doors, just a clean, unmistakable awareness that something essential had shifted, while he was busy believing nothing had. Later, he would replay smaller moments in his mind, the evenings that ended without questions, the conversations that stayed polite and brief, the calm responses he mistook for acceptance. At the time, he had taken comfort in them. He had told himself that peace meant safety. He was wrong. The mistake wasn't the affair. It was assuming silence meant ignorance. Across from him, Irea sat the way she always did, composed, attentive, unreadable. There was no anger in her face, no grief, no visible demand for answers. If anything, she looked settled, as though she had already passed through a decision and left him behind it. That was when fear finally found him. Not the sharp kind, the quiet kind that arrives when consequences stop being hypothetical. He searched her expression for clues, for warmth, for hesitation, anything that suggested negotiation was still possible. He found none. Whatever she knew, she had known it long enough to make peace with it. Whatever she planned, she wasn't discovering it in real time. And for the first time since he had started telling himself this was manageable, Marcel realized he had never been in control of the outcome, only the illusion of it. Some people mistake calm for weakness. Some people confuse restraint with passivity. Some people believe that if a person doesn't confront you, they don't see you. Marcel had believed all three, and that belief was about to cost him everything he thought was stable. There is a particular kind of betrayal that survives because it isn't dramatic. It doesn't arrive with suspicion. It doesn't demand confrontation. It lives comfortably inside routine. People often believe deception collapses when discovered. In reality, it usually collapses when it's underestimated. When one person assumes the other is unaware, unprepared, or too gentle to act, that assumption is common. It's also costly. In many relationships, calm partners are treated as background figures, present, reliable, easy to overlook. Their lack of reaction is misread as lack of awareness. Their restraint is taken as permission. Over time, this misunderstanding grows into confidence on one side and quiet clarity on the other. Marcel had built his certainty on that misunderstanding. He believed discretion protected him. He believed consistency kept things intact. He believed that as long as life appeared orderly, consequences could be postponed indefinitely. What he failed to recognize was that observation does not require confrontation, and awareness does not announce itself. Some people don't gather information to argue. They gather it to decide. And once a decision is made in silence, it doesn't need reinforcement. It only needs time. Most people have experienced this dynamic at least once, whether they recognized it at the time or not. A relationship where silence felt like peace. A partner whose calm made things feel uncomplicated. A situation where the absence of conflict was mistaken for the absence of awareness. It's easy to believe everything is fine when no one is asking questions. In psychology, silence is often misunderstood. Some people stay quiet because they are confused. Others stay quiet because they are collecting clarity. The difference between the two isn't volume, it's intention. Have you ever noticed how some people stop reacting right before they stop caring? How conversations become shorter, responses more measured, and disagreements disappear entirely? That shift is often misread as maturity or emotional stability. In reality, it can signal something else entirely: internal resolution. Marcel interpreted Irea's composure as contentment. He told himself that if something were wrong, she would say it. He trusted that discomfort announces itself. What he didn't consider was that not everyone processes betrayal out loud. Some people process it privately, deliberately, and without urgency. Listeners might recognize that pattern. The moment when someone across from you grows quieter, not because they've lost their voice, but because they've gained perspective. The moment when questions stop, not because answers are no longer needed, but because conclusions have already been drawn. Silence doesn't always mean nothing is happening. Sometimes it means everything has already happened internally. And by the time the other person notices the shift, they are no longer part of the decision-making process. The problem isn't infidelity alone. It's the assumption that awareness always announces itself. Many people believe that if someone knows they're being wronged, there will be visible signs: anger, confrontation, emotional volatility. When those signs don't appear, they conclude there is nothing to worry about. This belief is comforting, but it's also deeply flawed. Calm partners are often underestimated because they don't react impulsively. They don't demand immediate explanations. They don't escalate. Instead, they observe. They compare patterns. They note inconsistencies. And most importantly, they give themselves time to understand what they're seeing before deciding how to respond. This is where the imbalance forms. One person continues as usual, growing more confident with each uneventful day. The other quietly shifts from emotional involvement to strategic clarity. By the time the first person senses something is wrong, the second has already adjusted their expectations, boundaries, and future plans. Marcel mistook Irea's composure for tolerance. He assumed her steadiness meant dependence. He believed that because she didn't challenge him, she couldn't challenge his reality. What he failed to understand was that restraint is not submission, and patience is not permission. In relationships, the most consequential decisions are rarely made during arguments. They are made during moments of quiet recognition, when someone realizes not only what is happening, but what it says about how they are valued. That realization changes behavior long before it changes circumstances. And once someone stops protecting the version of you that benefits from their silence, the balance of power shifts permanently. What happens when the person you underestimate stops waiting for you to change? Not when they explode, not when they threaten, but when they quietly decide that clarity matters more than comfort. Marcel believed consequences arrived loudly. He assumed that if his life were truly at risk, someone would confront him first. What he didn't see was the space between discovery and exposure, the period where choices are made, evidence is organized, and emotional attachment gives way to resolve. That space is invisible to the person being watched. By the time Marcel sensed something had shifted, the decision had already been finalized. Not in anger, not in haste, in calm, deliberate certainty. Whatever protection he once benefited from had been withdrawn without ceremony. This story isn't about shock. It's about timing. It's about how silence can be misread until it becomes irreversible. As you listen, notice how often comfort delays accountability. Notice how confidence grows when it isn't challenged. And notice how restraint, when misunderstood, becomes power. For those joining for the first time, welcome. And to those who return for stories that explore dignity, consequence, and the cost of contempt, welcome back. If narratives like this hold your attention, consider subscribing. This vault is built for stories that move quietly but leave marks. Now, listen closely, because the fall rarely begins with discovery. It begins with being certain you're safe. Marcel came home after 10, carrying the confidence of someone who believed timing no longer mattered. The door closed softly behind him. Not careful, just practiced. He set his keys on the table instead of the hook by the door, metal touching wood with a sound that felt louder than it was. Irea didn't look up. She was seated at the table, a glass of water untouched beside her, her posture relaxed but deliberate. "You're late," she said, not as an accusation, just a statement. "Long day," Marcel replied, loosening his jacket. His voice carried the ease of someone used to explanations being accepted without inspection. "You eat?" he asked, glancing toward the kitchen. "Yes." There was a pause. He waited for more. When it didn't come, he felt relief settle in his shoulders. "You didn't wait," he said, lightly, as if teasing. "I have a meeting early tomorrow." "That makes sense." He nodded, grateful for the reason. Reasons kept things orderly. He moved closer, kissed the side of her head. She didn't flinch. She didn't lean in either. "You've been busy lately," he added, almost casually. "So have you," she replied. The symmetry pleased him. Shared distance felt safer than scrutiny. He headed for the shower, already convinced the night had passed its most difficult moment. He didn't notice the way her fingers tightened briefly around the glass, or how her gaze followed him, not with suspicion, but with quiet measurement. Marcel believed calm meant everything was fine. He believed unanswered questions expired on their own. Many people do. They mistake the absence of reaction for resolution, not realizing that observation often precedes understanding, and understanding doesn't require permission to grow. The water ran as Marcel stood under the shower, letting the day rinse away. He replayed the evening in fragments, the keys, her voice, the lack of questions. Each detail reinforced the same conclusion: nothing was wrong. He toweled off slowly, unhurried. Comfort has a way of stretching time. When he returned to the bedroom, Irea was already there, sitting against the headboard, scrolling through her phone. She looked up briefly. "You're not sleeping yet?" he asked. "Soon." He slipped into bed beside her, exhaling as though the night had demanded something of him. "I thought you'd be upset," he said, half smiling. "About what?" "Me being late." She considered him for a moment. "Should I be?" The question caught him off guard, but he laughed it off. "No, I just meant, I know," she said, and set her phone aside. That answer satisfied him. It felt like closure. Marcel turned onto his side, already drifting. Her presence, quiet and steady, reassured him. He believed that if something bothered her, she would bring it up. He believed that harmony was maintained by speaking discomfort aloud. It never occurred to him that some people resolve discomfort privately before deciding whether it deserves discussion at all. Within minutes, his breathing slowed. Irea remained still beside him, listening. Not for secrets, for patterns. The way confidence grows when it isn't challenged. The way people relax when they believe they're understood. Many conflicts don't erupt because one person is patient. They fade because the other assumes patience means acceptance. She turned off the lamp. Marcel slept easily, unaware that calm doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it means clarity has already begun forming, quietly, carefully, without the need for permission. Marcel fell asleep believing the night had closed neatly. Irea did not. She lay still beside him, her breathing shallow, eyes open to the dark ceiling. The room felt different once his certainty settled into sleep. Without the weight of his attention, details sharpened. The faint scent of unfamiliar cologne clinging to his collar. The way his phone had been placed face down on the dresser. Small things, not accusations, indicators. She turned slightly toward him. "You set your keys on the table," she said softly. His response was automatic, already distant. "You usually hang them up." "Forgot," he murmured, barely awake. She said nothing more. That was how she had learned to listen, by allowing space. People reveal themselves most clearly when they believe they're no longer being watched. Marcel's ease earlier hadn't come from honesty, it came from confidence. Confidence that calm meant safety. Confidence that questions would arrive if they were necessary. Irea had once believed that too. She remembered a time when uncertainty made her restless, when unanswered questions demanded immediate resolution. But experience had taught her something different. Understanding doesn't improve when rushed. It sharpens when observed over time. Patterns speak more clearly than explanations ever do. Beside her, Marcel shifted, comfortable, unburdened. Irea closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to think. Not about confrontation, but about consistency. About what she had seen, what she had heard, and what she had learned to trust, her own attention. Many people assume awareness requires reaction. In truth, awareness often begins in stillness. The ability to pause, rather than respond, creates space for clarity. And clarity, once formed, doesn't ask permission before changing how someone moves forward. Morning came gently. Marcel woke first, stretching as though the night had restored him. He glanced at the clock, then at Irea beside him. "You're still up early," he said, surprised. I didn't sleep much.
I have to go. I'll call
He
you
frowned
later.
briefly.
Okay.
You should rest
Have a good
more.
day.
She smiled faintly. I will. That answer satisfied him. It always had. He dressed quickly, humming under his breath, already moving through the day in his mind. At the door he paused. I'll be late again tonight. Irea looked up from the table. Okay. No follow-up. No request. No concern. Marcel left feeling unburdened. To him, the house felt steady, predictable. He believed the quiet meant balance had been restored. He believed that if something were wrong, it would demand his attention. Behind him, Irea remained seated long after the door closed. What Marcel interpreted as stability, she understood as confirmation. Not confirmation of betrayal that had already settled, but confirmation of how easily he relied on her restraint to protect his comfort. He assumed her calm existed for his benefit. He didn't consider that it might be serving her clarity instead. She gathered the empty glass, the untouched plate, the small details of the morning. Nothing dramatic. Nothing urgent. Just information aligning into coherence. Many people think safety comes from avoiding discomfort. In reality, it often comes from recognizing patterns early and responding thoughtfully. Silence isn't always avoidance. Sometimes it's assessment. And assessment, when done carefully, allows people to act from understanding rather than impulse. Irea stood, composed, already adjusting to a future Marcel still believed he controlled. And that difference, between assumption and awareness, was where the balance finally tipped. By mid-morning, Marcel had already forgotten the quiet weight of the house he'd left behind. The office greeted him with familiar sounds, keyboards, muted laughter, the comfort of routine. Here, things responded to him. Here, outcomes followed effort. He loosened his cuffs as he stepped into his office, confidence returning the moment the door closed. Niel was already there, perched against the edge of his desk as though she belonged. You're late, she said, smiling. Busy, Marcel replied, dropping his briefcase. That's what happens when people rely on you. She tilted her head. Does she ever complain? He chuckled. About what? About you being gone so much. Marcel waved a hand dismissively. She's not like that. Niel studied him. Not like demanding, emotional. She's calm. He said it like a compliment, though he didn't notice how easily it slid into assumption. She trusts me. Niel laughed softly. That sounds nice. It is, he said. Makes life simple. She crossed her arms, watching him. Simple doesn't ever make you nervous. Why would it? Marcel leaned back in his chair. If there were a problem, I'd know. Niel didn't answer right away. Her smile lingered, but her eyes searched his face, as if measuring how much confidence was real and how much was borrowed. People often confuse predictability with security. When someone's behavior doesn't change, it's tempting to believe circumstances haven't either. But consistency can mean many things. Sometimes comfort, sometimes observation. The difference is easy to miss when ease feels earned. Niel closed the office door behind her with a practiced motion, the click softer than it needed to be. You're unusually relaxed today, she said. Marcel glanced up from his screen. Should I not be? She shrugged. Men usually aren't this comfortable when they're lying. He laughed. I'm not lying. I'm managing. She stepped closer. That's what you call it. That's what it is. He leaned back, confident. No drama, no suspicion. Everything stays where it belongs. Niel hesitated. And you're sure? About what? About her. She folded her arms. Quiet women notice things. Marcel smiled. You're overthinking. Silence doesn't mean anything. It means something to people who pay attention, Niel said. Trust me, he replied. She'd say something if she knew. Niel's confidence wavered, just slightly. What if she's just waiting? For what? He shook his head. You're imagining problems that don't exist. She studied him, searching for doubt. Finding none, she forced a smile. I guess you'd know. Marcel stood, closing the distance between them. I do know. He believed that control came from staying ahead of questions. He believed reassurance was earned by consistency, not honesty. What he didn't see was how easily confidence turns into carelessness when it goes untested. Nielle's unease lingered even as he dismissed it. She understood something Marcel didn't yet. Calm isn't empty space. It's often where decisions are forming quietly. People who never react immediately are rarely unprepared. And when certainty belongs to only one side, it tends to be borrowed, not owned. Later that afternoon, Marcel stood near the window, phone pressed to his ear, watching the city move below as though it existed for his convenience. Nielle sat in the chair opposite him, arms crossed, waiting. "She texted," Marcel said when the call ended. Nielle leaned forward. "What did she say?" "Asked if I'd be home for dinner." He smirked. "I said I'd try, and that was it." He slipped the phone into his pocket. "No questions." Nielle exhaled, half relieved, half unsettled. "You don't ever worry she'll stop asking?" "Why would she?" Marcel replied. "That's just who she is. That's what worries me," Nielle said. "Some people don't argue because they don't need to." He turned to face her, amused. "You're giving her too much credit." "Am the first?" "Yes." His voice sharpened slightly. "I know my wife." Nielle studied him. "Do you?" Marcel laughed, dismissive. "She's predictable. Routine comforts her. She wouldn't disrupt her own life." Nielle looked away. "People change, not without reason," he said. "And she doesn't have one." That certainty sat easily with him. He believed understanding someone meant defining their limits for them. He believed that because Irea had always chosen restraint, she always would. Nielle's doubt lingered, but Marcel's confidence drowned it out. When one person believes consequences are unlikely, they stop behaving carefully. Overconfidence dulls awareness, especially when it's reinforced by silence. And when someone mistakes another person's composure for permission, they often reveal more than they intend, without ever realizing it. Nielle stopped him just before he reached the door. "Marcel," she said, quieter now. "I've seen this before." He turned, already impatient. "Seen what?" "This exact calm, this exact confidence." She hesitated. "Women like her don't react the way people expect." He sighed. "You're projecting." "I'm being realistic." Nielle's voice dropped. "The quiet ones scare me." He smiled, indulgent. "You're letting imagination get ahead of facts." "She hasn't changed?" Nielle asked. "Not even a little?" "No," he said firmly. "She's steady." "That's why this works." Nielle searched his face. "And if it stops working?" "It won't," he replied without hesitation. "She needs stability. She won't risk that." Nielle stepped back, unsettled by how easily he said it. "You're very sure of yourself." "I have reason to be." He reached for his coat. "You worry too much." As he left, Nielle remained standing, the unease he dismissed settling deeper in her chest. She understood something he refused to consider. People who are observant don't need to announce awareness. They adjust quietly, and by the time their certainty becomes visible, it's no longer open for discussion. Marcel, meanwhile, walked away convinced of his advantage. He believed calm meant control, and control meant safety. Many people make that mistake, confusing another person's restraint with dependence. In reality, restraint often signals self-command, and when one person assumes the other won't act, they usually reveal exactly how unprepared they are for what comes next. Marcel noticed the change 2 days later, not because it was dramatic, but because it was deliberate. "Can you come to dinner on Friday?" Irea asked, folding a receipt neatly before placing it in her bag. He glanced up, already calculating. Friday might be tight. She didn't respond immediately. She simply looked at him, waiting, not expectant, not disappointed. "Tight or impossible?" she asked. He hesitated. "Just a fraction." "Tight." She nodded once. "Okay." That was it. No follow-up. No negotiation. No disappointment disguised as understanding. She returned to what she was doing as though the question had been answered completely. Marcel felt an unexpected flicker of irritation. He wasn't used to conversations ending that cleanly. "You're not upset?" he asked. Should I be? No, he said quickly. I just thought. Then we're fine, she replied, calm and final. He watched her for a moment, unsettled by how easily she let the subject drop. The absence of resistance felt heavier than any argument. He had prepared explanations, reassurances, even an apology if necessary. None of it was needed. Later, alone, Marcel replayed the exchange. Her neutrality lingered in his thoughts longer than it should have. He told himself it meant maturity, flexibility, trust. Yet something about it felt unfamiliar, like a door closing without sound. People often expect power to announce itself loudly. In reality, control frequently appears as restraint. When someone stops negotiating, it doesn't always mean they've given in. Sometimes it means they've already decided what they're willing to accept and what they're no longer waiting for. Friday arrived without tension. Marcel expected it. The subtle check-ins, the last-minute reminders, the quiet sighs that usually followed when plans were uncertain. None of them came. As he adjusted his cufflinks, he glanced toward the kitchen. I might be late, he said, testing the air. Irea looked up from the counter. I know. That's fine with you? Yes. He waited. She didn't add anything. You don't want me to try harder? He asked, half joking. She met his eyes briefly. If you wanted to be there, you would. The simplicity of it unsettled him. There was no accusation in her tone, no disappointment he could respond to, just a statement of fact delivered without emotion. He cleared his throat. I'll see how the evening goes. Do that, she said. Marcel left feeling strangely dismissed. He was accustomed to managing expectations, not being released from them. Her lack of protest removed his role entirely, and that absence felt disorienting. At the office, the feeling followed him. He found himself replaying her words, not because they were harsh, but because they required no defense. He realized he didn't know whether she was adjusting to him or adjusting away from him. In many relationships, protest is mistaken for care. When it disappears, people assume comfort has replaced concern. In reality, silence can indicate a shift in investment. When someone stops asking for effort, it may be because they've stopped expecting it. An expectation, once withdrawn, rarely returns in the same form. Marcel arrived at the restaurant already unsettled. He checked his watch before stepping inside, irritation rising for reasons he couldn't fully name. Irea was seated at a corner table, posture relaxed, hands folded neatly in front of her. She looked up as he approached, expression unchanged. You didn't order, he said, sliding into the chair. I waited. That answer landed heavier than he expected. You didn't have to, he added. I wanted to. He studied her face, searching for cues, annoyance, relief, expectation. There was nothing to work with. You seem distant, he said. You seem distracted, she replied evenly. The symmetry unsettled him again. I've just had a lot going on, he offered. I know. The waiter approached, menus exchanged, water poured. When they were alone again, Marcel leaned back, uneasy. Her neutrality felt deliberate now, not passive. He realized he didn't know how to respond to someone who wasn't asking anything of him. Are we okay? He asked finally. Irea considered him for a moment. We're here. That wasn't reassurance. It was accuracy. Marcel felt a faint tightening in his chest. He had always believed relationships were maintained through dialogue, through addressing discomfort quickly, smoothing over tension. What he was facing now felt different. Her calm wasn't inviting conversation, it was closing it. When neutrality replaces engagement, it often signals a change in priority. People don't always withdraw loudly. Sometimes they conserve energy by refusing to invest it where clarity has already been reached. And that conservation can feel more unsettling than confrontation, because it offers nothing to push against. The waiter returned, setting plates down between them. Steam rose briefly, then faded. Marcel hadn't realized how tense he was until he adjusted in his seat for the third time. You look tired, he said, reaching for his glass. You look occupied, Irea replied. He smiled faintly. That's not the same thing. No, she agreed. It isn't. They ate in silence for a few moments, the kind that usually settled him. Tonight, it pressed in. Irea, he began. She lifted her eyes to his, unhurried. Do you enjoy lying? The question landed softly. No edge, no judgment. He blinked. What? Not morally, she continued, as though clarifying a technical point. Practically. Does it make life easier? His hand paused mid-air. Where is this coming from? I'm asking. I don't lie, he said quickly. She nodded once. Okay, that was all. The waiter returned again, breaking the moment, but it didn't dissolve. Marcel felt, exposed without being accused, unsettled without being challenged. Her question hadn't demanded a confession, it had invited reflection, and he hadn't been prepared for either. Questions framed without anger often carry more weight than accusations. They don't force defense, they reveal readiness. When someone asks calmly, it suggests they're not seeking reassurance. They're measuring alignment, and when alignment is already decided, answers matter less than how quickly someone offers them. Marcel finished his meal distracted, unaware that the most unsettling conversations are the ones that don't argue back, because they're no longer negotiating truth. They were home before 10. Marcel moved through the apartment with the same restless ease, loosening his tie, checking his watch, already half elsewhere. Irea placed her bag on the chair, unhurried, her movements exact. I'm going to shower, he said. She nodded. Okay. The bathroom door closed. Water followed. Irea remained where she was. The apartment settled into a quiet that felt heavier than before, not tense, just full. She picked up the glass from the table, rinsed it, set it upside down. Then the sound came. A buzz. Soft. Brief. Marcel's phone lit up on the counter. Irea didn't move toward it. She didn't reach out. She didn't need to. The name wasn't visible from where she stood, but the timing was familiar. The interruption always arrived when he believed the moment had passed safely. The phone buzzed again. She inhaled slowly, then exhaled. Not because she was steadying herself, but because she was marking the moment. She thought of the late arrivals that came with relaxed explanations. The way his attention drifted during conversations. The questions he never asked back. None of it rushed through her mind. It arrived in order, like pieces clicking into alignment. From the bathroom, Marcel called out, "Can you grab me a towel?" "In a minute," she replied. Her voice didn't change. The phone went still. People often believe confirmation comes with shock. In reality, it usually arrives quietly, when scattered details finally agree with one another. And when that happens, reaction becomes optional. Understanding doesn't demand drama. Sometimes, it simply demands honesty with oneself before anything else. By the time Marcel stepped out of the bathroom, the phone was dark again. "Did my phone go off?" he asked, rubbing his hair with the towel. "Yes," Irea said. She handed him another towel, folded neatly. "Twice. Probably work," he replied too quickly, already reaching for it. He scrolled, then locked the screen. Nothing urgent. She watched him. Not the phone, but the way his shoulders loosened after he said it. Relief always arrived before explanation. "Dinner was quiet," he added, testing the air. "It was," she agreed. "You didn't like it?" "I liked the food." That was all she offered. Marcel sat, checking his messages again, thumb moving faster this time. He didn't notice that Irea had shifted her attention inward, replaying moments without emotion. Attached, the delayed replies, the softened tone when he said certain names, the way his phone never rested face up anymore. None of it hurt in the way people expect betrayal to hurt. What she felt instead was alignment. Things no longer contradicted each other. "I'll answer this later," he said, placing the phone down. "Of course," she replied. She turned toward the window, giving him privacy without being asked. That choice mattered. Not because she was avoiding truth, but because she no longer needed to chase it. The information had stabilized on its own. When patterns repeat without variation, they stop being coincidences. And when someone notices without reacting, it often means they're prioritizing clarity over comfort. Emotional discipline isn't the absence of feeling. It's the decision not to let feeling interfere with understanding what's already clear. Later that night, Marcel fell asleep quickly. Irea did not. She sat at the small desk by the window, laptop open, the room lit only by the muted glow of the screen. Her phone rested beside it, not his. She hadn't touched his device. She didn't need to. What mattered now wasn't proof of feeling, but proof of fact. She opened a folder she'd created weeks earlier. Nothing dramatic, just dates, times, expenses she hadn't questioned before, messages he'd mentioned casually, now placed back into context. Each entry added weight, not shock. Behind her, Marcel shifted in his sleep. "You coming to bed?" he murmured. "Soon," she said. That answer was still true. She saved the document and closed the laptop, not because she was finished, but because she understood pacing. Preparation isn't frantic, it's intentional. She had learned that reacting too quickly clouds judgment, while patience sharpens it. Emotion demands release. Strategy requires containment. Irea wasn't suppressing anything. She was redirecting it. Marcel believed silence meant forgiveness or confusion or fear. He didn't recognize the third option, assessment. When someone stops asking questions, it doesn't always mean they've given up. Sometimes it means they're choosing the most effective response, not the loudest one. Irea stood, composed, and turned off the light. Some people protect relationships by confronting every discomfort immediately. Others protect themselves by understanding patterns before acting. The difference lies in intention. And once intention shifts from preserving comfort to preserving dignity, preparation becomes not just reasonable, but necessary. The dinner party was familiar enough to feel safe. Friends filled the long table, voices overlapping, glasses lifted and set down in easy rhythm. Marcel relaxed the moment he stepped inside. This was where nothing unexpected happened, where stories repeated themselves, where he knew exactly which version of himself to present. Irea stood beside him, composed, her hand resting lightly at his back as they greeted the host. "You look great," someone said to her. "Thank you," Irea replied, smiling. Marcel noticed how effortless it looked, not practiced, settled. They took their seats. Marcel leaned back, crossing his arms, already slipping into familiarity. Irea sat upright, attentive, but not performing. When someone spoke, she listened fully. When she responded, she didn't rush. "So," a friend said, raising their glass, "how's married life treating you two?" Marcel laughed easily, still surviving. A few chuckles followed. Irea didn't laugh. She smiled instead, small, calm, deliberate. "Thriving, actually," she said. The table quieted for a fraction longer than expected. Marcel glanced at her. "You think?" "I know," she replied, meeting his eyes briefly before turning back to the group. Across the table, Niel froze. Just for a second, long enough to notice. The conversation resumed, but something had shifted. Irea hadn't contradicted Marcel. She hadn't explained herself. She had simply stated a truth on her own terms, and in public, that mattered. People often assume control looks loud. In reality, narrative power comes from choosing when to speak and when not to. When someone claims certainty without justification, it signals preparation, not impulse. And preparation, once visible, changes how every word that follows is received. As dinner continued, Marcel noticed the pauses before people spoke. They were brief, almost polite, but new. He caught them between questions, between laughter, between sips of wine. Each pause felt like a half-second too long, as if the room were recalibrating. Irea remained unbothered. She lifted her glass when spoken to, nodded when someone else shared a story, and asked thoughtful questions that kept attention away from herself. When Marcel spoke, she didn't interrupt. She didn't correct him. She simply let his words exist beside hers. Niel, seated across the table, shifted in her chair. "You're quiet tonight," Niel said, forcing a smile. I'm listening, Irea replied. Her tone was pleasant, neutral, complete. Marcel felt an odd tension settle in his chest. He wasn't sure why. Nothing was wrong. No one was accusing anyone of anything. And yet, he felt observed in a way he wasn't used to. A friend leaned closer to Irea. You two seem good. We are, Irea said. Again, no elaboration. Nielle's fingers tightened around her fork. She avoided Irea's gaze now, focusing, instead, on her plate. Confidence drains quickly when it isn't reinforced. Nielle had relied on Marcel's certainty to steady her own, and watching it go unchallenged but not affirmed made it harder to breathe. Public settings often magnify power shifts because reactions are restrained. When someone maintains composure under observation, it signals control. Body language fills the gaps words leave behind. And when silence begins to feel intentional rather than empty, those paying attention start to realize something is coming. They just don't know when. Nielle caught Marcel's arm as he stepped away from the table. Can we talk? She asked, already guiding him toward the balcony. The door closed behind them, muting the laughter inside. City lights stretched out below, distant and indifferent. She knows, Nielle said immediately. Marcel scoffed. Knows what? Don't do that, Nielle replied. Not now. She doesn't know anything, he said, lowering his voice. You're reading into nothing. Nielle shook her head. That line she used, about thriving, that wasn't casual. It was harmless, Marcel said. You're making yourself nervous. No, Nielle insisted. She wasn't reassuring anyone. She was claiming something. Marcel crossed his arms. You're imagining intent where there isn't any. Nielle stared at him. You don't see it, because you don't want to. He laughed quietly. You're overthinking. She wouldn't do anything in public. That's exactly why I'm worried, Nielle said. She doesn't need to. Marcel stepped closer, voice firm. She's calm. That's all this is. Nielle swallowed. Calm doesn't mean harmless. Inside, Marcel felt irritation rise, not fear. He believed panic belonged to people without control. What he didn't recognize was that denial often looks like confidence until it's tested. Nielle leaned against the railing, breathing shallowly. If she's already decided something. She hasn't, he interrupted. If she had, I'd know. But as he said it, he realized he was no longer certain why he believed that. Some people rely on past patterns to predict future behavior. Others notice when patterns change. When fear appears in someone who once felt secure, it's often because they've sensed a shift before they can explain it. And when that fear is dismissed, it tends to grow quietly, waiting for confirmation. They returned to the table together. Marcel resumed his seat with practiced ease, smiling as though nothing had interrupted him. Nielle remained standing for a moment longer than necessary before sitting, her composure thinner now. Irea glanced at them briefly, just long enough to register alignment. Then she turned back to the conversation. So, someone said, Any plans coming up? Nothing urgent, Marcel replied. Irea met his gaze. Some things are already scheduled. He blinked. Are they? Yes. Her tone was neutral, informative. Marcel forced a smile, but the feeling from the balcony followed him back. He sensed the room differently now, not hostile, not suspicious, but attentive, as if people were subconsciously waiting for something to resolve. Nielle avoided eye contact altogether. Irea leaned back in her chair, relaxed. She didn't need to explain herself. She had already set the frame. Public perception often hinges on confidence, not detail. When someone speaks without defensiveness, it suggests certainty, and certainty, once displayed, invites anticipation. As the evening wound down, Irea thanked the host, gracious and composed. Outside, Marcel walked beside her in silence. You, different tonight, he said. She smiled faintly. Different how? More sure of yourself? I've always been sure, she replied. I just don't always share it. That was when Marcel understood, not what was coming, but that something was. If this moment feels familiar to you, You're not alone. Many people have realized too late that someone knew more than they let on. If you've experienced that shift, where certainty appears quietly, share your thoughts. Stories like these are shaped by recognition, and recognition often arrives before explanation. The decline happened at lunch. Marcel didn't notice it at first. He handed the card to the server without looking up, still replaying the previous night in his head. The pause came back wrong. Too long, too careful. "I'm sorry," the server said quietly. "It didn't go through." Marcel frowned. "Try again." The second attempt ended the same way. "That's strange," he muttered, pulling out his phone. He checked the app. Everything looked normal. Balance intact. No alerts. He forced a laugh. Must be the machine. The server offered a polite smile. "You can call your bank." Marcel stepped aside, irritation rising. He dialed quickly. "Thank you for calling," the representative said. "How can I help?" "My card was declined," he said. "There's no reason for it." A pause. Keys tapping. "There's been a change," she replied. "What kind of change?" "Authorization was modified earlier this week." Marcel's jaw tightened. "By who?" Another pause. "Your wife." In that moment, Marcel understood something fundamental had shifted. Not emotionally, logistically. When access changes without argument, it signals preparation. Financial boundaries are rarely about punishment, they're about protection. And protection, once in place, doesn't ask permission. Marcel lowered his voice. "What do you mean, modified?" "The spending authorization on the joint discretionary account was adjusted," the representative said evenly. "Certain transactions now require secondary approval." "Secondary approval from who?" "From the primary account holder." His grip tightened around the phone. "That's me. There was a change," she repeated. "Your wife requested it. It was processed after verification." Marcel laughed once, sharply. "She can't just do that." "She can," the representative replied. And she did. He ended the call without another word. Back at the table, the food sat untouched. For the first time in years, money, something he had always treated as neutral ground, felt unfamiliar. This wasn't an argument. There had been no warning, no discussion to dismiss, just action. People often assume authority must be announced to be legitimate. In reality, authority is most effective when exercised quietly and within established systems. When someone understands the structure well enough to use it calmly, it signals forethought, not impulse. And forethought, once revealed, is difficult to undo. Marcel didn't wait. The moment he walked through the door, he dropped his keys harder than usual. "What did you do?" he asked. Irea looked up from the couch, calm, remote in hand. "About what?" "My card was declined." "Yes." That single word unsettled him more than denial would have. "You changed the account," he said. "Without telling me." "I adjusted access," she replied. "There's a difference. You can't just decide that on your own." "I didn't decide," she said evenly. "I acted." Marcel paced. "This is controlling." She shook her head. "No. This is organizing." "For what?" he demanded. She met his eyes. "For clarity." He stopped moving. The absence of anger in her voice made it harder to argue. She wasn't reacting to him. She was managing reality. When decisions are implemented without explanation, it often means the explanation phase has already passed. Financial boundaries aren't emotional leverage. They're structural. And once structure changes, conversations follow different rules. Marcel's voice lowered. "So this is punishment now?" Irea set the remote aside. "No." "Then, what is it?" "Preparation." He scoffed. "For what?" "Some dramatic confrontation." She stood, unhurried. "For the truth." "That doesn't make sense." "It does," she replied calmly. "Money isn't emotion, it's infrastructure. And infrastructure shouldn't be vulnerable." Marcel stared at her. "You planned this?" "Yes." The certainty in her voice unsettled him more than anger would have. She wasn't improvising. She wasn't reacting to a feeling. She had evaluated risk and adjusted accordingly. "You're acting like this is already over," he said. "I'm acting like it matters," she corrected. When people separate resources before emotions explode, it signals intention. Strategic decisions are often made before conversations because they protect clarity. Emotional reactions fade. Structural changes remain. And once someone chooses foresight over reassurance, the balance of power doesn't just shift, it settles. Niel felt it before she could name it. It wasn't something Marcel said. It was what he didn't say. He had gone quiet that morning. No teasing messages, no reassurance. Just a short text, "Busy today." That had never happened before. She waited until late afternoon before knocking on his office door. When she stepped inside, she knew immediately something had shifted. His jacket was still on, his desk untouched, his phone face down. "You okay?" she asked. Marcel didn't look up. "Do you need something?" The distance startled her. "You didn't tell me about the account." He stiffened. "What account?" "Don't," Niel said quietly. "I know something happened." He finally met her eyes. There was irritation there, but beneath it, something thinner, uncertain. "She crossed a line," he said. "That's all." Niel swallowed. She wouldn't do that unless she already knew. "She doesn't know anything," he snapped. Niel shook her head. "This isn't emotional. This is administrative." Marcel stood abruptly. "You're panicking." "I'm assessing," she replied. "And assessment says I'm visible now." She paced once, then stopped. "Has she said my name?" "No." "That's worse," Niel whispered. "That means she doesn't need to." Marcel laughed sharply. "You're giving her too much credit." But Niel was already backing away. She understood what he didn't yet. Exposure doesn't begin with accusation. It begins when someone stops needing confirmation. When structures change before conversations do, it's often because conclusions have already been reached. Niel left the office with one clear thought pressing against her chest. Whatever was coming, it wasn't being rushed. And timing, when controlled by someone calm, is rarely accidental. Marcel didn't go home right away. He sat in his car long after the engine stopped, fingers tightening around the steering wheel as thoughts circled without settling. Niel's words replayed themselves, each repetition sharper than the last. Administrative. That word bothered him. At home, Irea was folding laundry on the couch. The television played quietly in the background. Nothing in the room looked different, and that made it worse. "You talked to the bank again?" he asked. She didn't look up. "No, you should," he said. "They made a mistake. There wasn't one." His jaw tightened. "You don't get to decide that." She folded another shirt. "I already did." Marcel paced. "You're acting like I did something wrong." Her pause was brief, measured. "You're acting like you don't understand consequences." "I understand control," he snapped. "And this is you trying to take it." She met his eyes calmly. "No. This is me letting go of pretending you had it." The words landed harder than he expected. He felt heat rise in his chest, irritation, slipping into something thinner, more erratic. "You think you're smarter than me now?" "I think I'm clearer," she replied. That difference unsettled him. He'd always relied on explanation, on charm, on smoothing tension until it dissolved. None of it worked here. She wasn't engaging. She wasn't defending herself. She was responding like someone who had already adjusted her expectations. Entitlement often cracks when it stops being rewarded. When access is reduced and reassurance withdrawn, confidence has nowhere to land. Marcel felt that loss acutely now, not as fear yet, but as a restless need to reassert himself. And the more he tried, the less readable Irea became. Niel called that night. Marcel let it ring twice before answering. "What? You didn't warn me," she said. Her voice was tight now, stripped of flirtation. "HR asked for documentation this afternoon." His stomach dropped. "About what?" "Expenses," she said. "Travel reimbursements, shared projects." A pause. Personal overlap. That doesn't mean anything, he said quickly. It means timing, Niel replied. And timing doesn't happen by accident. Marcel closed his eyes. You're panicking. I'm responding, she said. There's a difference. The line went dead. Inside the apartment, Irea moved through the kitchen, rinsing a mug, setting it carefully on the rack. Marcel watched her like a stranger now, searching for tells that never came. You talked to anyone today? He asked. She shook her head. No. You sure? Yes. The certainty in her voice wasn't defensive. It was complete. Marcel felt something shift again, subtler this time. Not anger, not fear. The realization that whatever was unfolding didn't require his participation. That unnerved him more than conflict ever had. Niel texted again. She's not reacting. That's what scares me. Marcel typed back, then erased it. For the first time, he didn't know which version of the situation he was supposed to maintain. Irea dried her hands and turned to him. You look tired. I'm fine, he said too quickly. She studied him for a moment, expression neutral. Rest helps with perspective. That was all. As she walked past him, Marcel understood the final piece. Panic belonged to those scrambling for certainty. Irea wasn't scrambling. She was still. And stillness, when paired with preparation, often means the outcome has already been decided. In moments like this, people learn an uncomfortable lesson. Confidence erodes fastest when it's built on access rather than accountability. When access is withdrawn calmly, without explanation, those who relied on it are left confronting their own instability. Marcel didn't question the meeting invite. The subject line was neutral. Status review. The room number familiar. He arrived early, jacket pressed, expression set. Whatever Niel had been hinting at, he told himself it was anxiety looking for shape. The door was already open. He stepped in and stopped. Irea was seated at the table, not beside him, not waiting. Positioned comfortably, a slim folder placed squarely in front of her hands. Across from her sat two people Marcel recognized immediately, though he'd never spoken to them outside formal settings. One from HR, one from legal. Niel sat at the far end. She looked small. What is this? Marcel asked, his voice louder than intended. Irea didn't answer right away. She looked up, met his eyes, and gestured toward the chair beside Niel. Sit down, she said. Niel's hands trembled as she folded them together. This is inappropriate, Marcel added, forcing a laugh. You can't just... This meeting was scheduled weeks ago, the HR representative said calmly. Please, take a seat. Marcel remained standing, heart pounding now, not from fear, but from disbelief. The room felt orderly, procedural, final. Irea hadn't brought emotion with her. She had brought structure. People often imagine exposure as dramatic. In reality, the most effective confrontations are quiet and procedural. When accountability is handled through established systems, it limits denial and centers facts. Preparation doesn't shout. It arranges the room so truth has somewhere to sit. Marcel finally sat. The chair scraped softly against the floor, louder than it should have been. He glanced from face to face, searching for an explanation that didn't arrive. This isn't necessary, he said. Whatever this is, it can be handled privately. The legal representative spoke first. This meeting exists to clarify conflicts of interest and policy violations. Niel's breath caught. HR nodded. We're here to review documentation and ensure procedural fairness. Marcel frowned. Documentation for what? Irea opened the folder, but didn't slide it forward yet. For accuracy, she said. Her voice was steady, informational. This isn't a personal conversation, HR continued. It's an internal review. Marcel's irritation flared. Based on what? Based on reported overlap, the legal representative replied. And corroborating records. Niel shook her head slightly, as if refusing to accept what her body already understood. Irea finally spoke again. I didn't report feelings, she said. I reported facts. Marcel turned toward her. You involved them? I involved the appropriate process, she corrected. The distinction mattered. Emotion invites argument. Process invites verification. When issues are framed structurally rather than personally, they bypass persuasion and move directly toward outcome. Many people believe fairness requires confrontation. In professional systems, fairness requires documentation. When someone understands that difference, they stop seeking validation and start securing accuracy. And once accuracy enters the room, denial loses its footing. Irea slid the folder forward, not toward Marcel, but to the center of the table. It stopped between them. She didn't open it immediately. "This is excessive," Marcel said, his voice tight now. "You're making assumptions." Irea finally looked at him. "I'm presenting records." She opened the folder. Not all at once. One page at a time. Dates. Times. Expense entries aligned too neatly to dismiss. The legal representative leaned in slightly. HR followed. Nielle's breath became uneven. Those were business trips," she said quickly. Irea didn't respond to her. She turned the next page. Shared travel. Duplicated reimbursements. Messages logged within working hours. Attached without commentary. Marcel shook his head. "You went through my accounts." "I reviewed shared resources," Irea replied. "That's different." Nielle's voice cracked. "You kept records?" "Yes." No emphasis. No pride. Just fact. Documentation doesn't accuse, it demonstrates. When information is arranged chronologically, it removes interpretation and leaves only alignment. This is why effective accountability relies on records rather than memory. Memory argues, records confirm, and when confirmation arrives without emotion attached, it becomes difficult to challenge without exposing further inconsistency. Nielle's hands slipped into her lap. Marcel stared at the folder, realization settling in stages. This wasn't discovery. This was presentation. Nielle pushed her chair back abruptly. "This isn't fair," she said, her voice thin now. "You don't understand the context." The legal representative looked up. "You're welcome to explain it." Nielle opened her mouth, then closed it. No explanation formed. Marcel leaned forward. "This is being blown out of proportion." HR glanced at the folder. "The pattern is consistent." Nielle's composure finally slipped. Her hands shook as she pressed them flat against the table. "I didn't think." She stopped herself. "I didn't know she would." Irea spoke for the first time in several minutes. "Sit down." Nielle froze. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Nielle sat. Marcel stared at Irea, disbelief giving way to something colder. "You planned this," he said. "Yes," Irea replied, not defensively, not triumphantly. "Prepared." Nielle's eyes filled, panic now fully exposed. "You could have talked to us," she whispered. Irea turned to her. "I listened." That answer landed heavier than any accusation. When people rely on silence to continue harmful behavior, they often mistake restraint for approval. But restraint can also be observation, and observation, when paired with evidence, removes the need for debate. Emotional appeals falter in procedural spaces because systems respond to consistency, not urgency. Marcel looked around the room and understood, too late, that this wasn't about convincing anyone. It was about confirming what had already been made clear. The room went quiet, not the awkward kind, the resolved kind. HR closed the folder gently. "Based on the documentation, we'll be moving forward with formal review procedures." The legal representative nodded. "Effective immediately." Nielle lowered her head, shoulders collapsing inward. Marcel felt the words pass through him without landing. "This doesn't end like this," he said, grasping for ground. "We can explain." "There's nothing left to explain," Irea said. He turned to her. "You ruined me." She met his gaze, steady. "I stopped protecting you. No bitterness, no satisfaction, just truth." HR stood. "You'll both be contacted regarding next steps." Nielle didn't look up. Marcel remained seated as the room emptied, the chair suddenly too large, the table too wide. He searched Irea's face for something. Anger, grief, doubt. There was none. You could have forgiven me, he said quietly. She paused. You never asked. That was the moment it ended. Not legally, not professionally, but internally. As Irea stood to leave, she didn't look back. Stories like this remind us that silence isn't weakness. It's often discernment. If this moment struck a nerve, if you've ever realized someone knew more than they let on, share your thoughts. And if narratives about clarity, dignity, and consequence matter to you, support the space where they're told. Irea walked out with nothing raised but her standard. The email arrived before noon. Marcel read it twice, then a third time, as though repetition might soften the language. Administrative leave, pending review, no timeline, no reassurance, just procedure. Niel didn't respond to his messages. At the office, doors that once stayed open now closed quietly when he passed. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A colleague nodded at him in the hallway, then looked away. This is temporary, Marcel said to no one in particular. Later, HR called. The tone was careful, neutral. Your access has been suspended. For how long? He asked. We'll be in touch. The line went dead. What unsettled him wasn't the loss itself, it was how quickly it happened. No shouting, no debate. Just systems doing what they were designed to do once facts were aligned. Consequences often feel sudden, only because denial delays recognition. Professional accountability rarely arrives with drama, it arrives with distance, access changes, and language that no longer negotiates. When outcomes are handled procedurally, they leave little room for performance, only adjustment. The silence spread faster outside the office. Invitations stopped arriving. Group chats went quiet. Friends who once called without warning now sent brief messages, careful ones. Hope you're okay. Let me know if you want to talk. No one asked what happened. At a cafe he used to frequent, Marcel caught his reflection in the window while waiting for his order. Two people he recognized were seated nearby. They lowered their voices when he stepped closer. Hey, he said, attempting ease. They smiled, thin and quick. Hey. The conversation didn't resume. At home that evening, Marcel said, People are acting strange. Irea set a plate on the counter. They're adjusting. To what? To information, she replied. He frowned. They don't even know the whole story. They know enough, she said. Social circles often respond to clarity with distance, not out of cruelty, but caution. When reputations shift, people protect themselves by stepping back rather than confronting. Isolation isn't always punishment. It's the absence of trust where familiarity once stood. Marcel stopped checking his phone as often. There was nothing there anymore. No reassurance disguised as concern. No distractions to soften the quiet. Even Niel had gone silent. One evening he stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, adjusting his collar, then letting it fall. The reflection looked unfamiliar, smaller. I gave everything to that job, he said suddenly. Irea was at the table, reviewing a document. You gave what you chose to. That's not fair, he snapped. You make it sound calculated. She looked up. Impact doesn't depend on intention. The words stung because they were precise. Later, he sat alone on the couch, replaying conversations, trying to locate the exact moment where confidence turned into exposure. Humiliation isn't loud. It's internal. The slow recognition that the image you relied on no longer protects you. When accountability arrives, it often forces a reckoning with self-perception. People grieve not only what they've lost, but who they believe themselves to be. And that grief is quieter when there's no one left to perform for. Irea didn't celebrate. She moved through the apartment with the same measured calm, but something had shifted. Not coldness, space. She no longer filled silence for him. Marcel noticed it in small ways. She stopped reminding him of appointments, stopped asking how his day went. When he spoke, she listened, but she didn't lean in. You're different, he said one night. She considered that. I'm consistent. With what? With reality. He had no answer for that. She began sleeping earlier, waking earlier, structuring her days without reference to his. There was no hostility in it, just independence. Distance, when chosen deliberately, isn't cruelty. It's boundary. When someone steps back without anger, it signals closure forming quietly. Not every ending needs confrontation. Some arrive through absence, when care is replaced by clarity and proximity is no longer required to feel resolved. Irea stood at the window later that night, city lights reflecting faintly in the glass. She wasn't watching him anymore. She was facing forward. The apartment was nearly empty when Marcel finally spoke. "You ruined me." The words hung between them, heavier than he intended, weaker than he hoped. Irea didn't look up right away. She was folding the last of her clothes into a suitcase, movements unhurried, precise. "No," she said calmly. "I stopped protecting you." He laughed, sharp and humorless. "You call this protection? I lost everything." "You lost access," she replied. "There's a difference." Marcel stepped closer. "You could have handled this differently." "I did," she said. "I handled it honestly." His voice dropped. "I loved you." She paused then, fingers resting on the fabric. "Love doesn't survive contempt." That answer landed softly, but it ended the argument before it could grow. She wasn't persuading him. She was clarifying herself. When conflict reaches this stage, conversation shifts from repair to truth. Accusations look for relief. Clarity looks for alignment. And alignment, once broken, can't be restored by regret alone. Marcel exhaled slowly, as if choosing restraint might soften the moment. "I made mistakes," he said. "That doesn't erase everything we were." Irea zipped the suitcase halfway, then stopped. "It changes what it meant. You're acting like none of it mattered." "It mattered," she replied. "That's why it ended." He shook his head. "You don't walk away from love like this." She finally turned to face him. "You don't betray someone you respect." The word landed cleanly. Respect, not anger, not heartbreak. "I was under pressure," he said. "You know how things get." "I know how choices work," she answered. "Pressure reveals priorities. It doesn't create them." Marcel looked away. "You're cold." "No," she said. "I'm finished negotiating." There's a point in some relationships where pain gives way to precision. When someone stops arguing, it's often because they've already separated feeling from decision. Love can survive disappointment. It rarely survives sustained disregard. Marcel's voice softened, losing its edge. "We can still fix this." Irea closed the suitcase. "Fix what?" she asked gently. "Us," he said. "Time passed. People slip. That doesn't mean it ends like this." She rested her hands on the suitcase handle. "You're asking for restoration without accountability." "I said I was sorry." "You said it after everything was decided," she replied. "That's not remorse. That's reaction." Marcel swallowed. "I don't know how to be anything else right now." "I know," she said. "And that's why this can't continue." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "So, this is it?" She nodded once. Some endings don't come from anger but from accuracy. When someone realizes they've outgrown the version of love being offered, staying becomes dishonest. Closure isn't about punishment, it's about alignment. And alignment can't be forced once it's been lost. Marcel stood still as Irea lifted the suitcase. "So that's it," he said. "You're just leaving." She paused at the door, not turning back immediately. "I already left," she said quietly. "This is just the part where my body follows." He let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. "You're really done?" "Yes." No emphasis, no cruelty. "I would have changed," he said. She looked at him then, not with anger, not with sadness, with understanding. "You would have delayed," she replied. "And I would have shrunk. I won't do that again." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was clear. She opened the door. "Take care of yourself," she added, not as forgiveness, but as closure. When the door closed, Marcel remained where he was, surrounded by a life that no longer adjusted around him. Some decisions don't announce themselves with certainty. They arrive when someone chooses self-respect over familiarity. Moral clarity isn't loud. It's consistent. And when someone leaves without resentment, it often means they've already finished grieving what they once hoped love would be. Months passed without announcement. Marcel noticed time differently now, measured less by progress and more by absence. One afternoon, while waiting at a crosswalk, he saw her. Irea stood across the street, sunlight catching the edge of her coat. She was mid-conversation with someone beside her, head tilted slightly as she listened. Then she laughed. Not politely, not carefully, genuinely. Marcel froze. He hadn't heard that sound in years, not because she hadn't made it, but because he'd stopped creating space for it. The person beside her said something again. "I know," Irea replied, smiling. "That's what I thought too." The light changed. She stepped forward without looking his way. Growth rarely announces itself to those left behind. It simply becomes visible when comparison is unavoidable. And when someone learns to listen again, to others and to themselves, joy tends to return quietly, without needing permission. They reached the opposite curb. The man beside her said something again, softer this time. Irea shook her head, still smiling. "You're impossible," she said, amused, not guarded. Marcel watched the exchange with an ache he couldn't name. There was ease in her posture now. No calculation, no restraint mistaken for politeness. She wasn't managing the moment, she was inside it. He realized then that what he was seeing wasn't recovery, it was presence. People often confuse happiness with relief. Relief comes from escaping pain. Happiness comes from alignment, when someone no longer has to minimize themselves to maintain peace. Genuine laughter is often the first sign that someone feels safe being fully seen again. The light changed once more. Irea and the man disappeared into the crowd, her laughter lingering just long enough to make its point without explanation. Marcel stood there longer than necessary. He replayed the last months in reverse, searching for a moment he could still touch. There wasn't one. What remained wasn't anger toward her, but recognition of something he'd missed while it was still within reach. She hadn't rebuilt herself to prove anything. She had simply grown. And that growth had carried her somewhere he could no longer follow, not because she shut him out, but because he hadn't kept pace. The consequence wasn't loss alone, it was irrelevance. People often expect justice to feel loud or decisive. Sometimes it's quieter than that. Sometimes it's realizing that someone didn't break because of you. They expanded, beyond you. Growth, when it happens without bitterness, doesn't seek witnesses. It just keeps moving. Marcel turned away, understanding at last that nothing had been taken from him. Something had been outgrown. Marcel walked on, carrying a truth that didn't bruise. It clarified. She hadn't destroyed him. She hadn't needed to. She had chosen growth over endurance, and that choice carried consequences neither of them could reverse. What felt like punishment to him was simply distance created by difference. She had changed direction. He had stayed still. Outgrowing someone isn't cruelty. It's the result of learning what you will no longer accept. And when growth becomes non-negotiable, separation stops feeling like loss and starts feeling like alignment. That is the quiet justice of it. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you that dignity doesn't shout and strength doesn't rush, consider subscribing for more narratives about clarity, consequence, and the kind of power that doesn't need permission. Some endings don't ask for attention. They earn reflection.